Secrets and Spies presents Espresso Martini with Chris Carr and Matt Fulton.
Hello everybody and welcome to Espresso Martini, our delayed first episode of 2024, which already looks like it's going to be a dramatic year.
Stressful year.
Yeah. I mean, it's been this time last month, it was Christmas Day, which, I miss it already. Christmas feels like a very distant memory.
I know.
So, yeah, Matt, how you doing? How was your Christmas break?
It was good. It was pretty chill. It was uneventful. Now here we are on the 86th day of January. Back after a little while off. I mean, we've had stuff out, but we haven't done our thing in a while. So it's good to be back.
Yeah, we haven't done this in ages because the last time we did this was the beginning of December.
I know.
And so it's been, I dread to think how many weeks it's been. Somebody can predict. It feels like it's been 7 or 8 weeks almost, but
Probably.
it's been a while.
Probably. Yeah, 7-ish. Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's so much that we've sort of missed, or I know this episode is sort of just like a catch up kind of backlog thing, stuff that has been going on for a couple weeks. We're just sort of now getting to, and there's I don't know, a few more things. We were looking at the articles for this, and I was like, that would be a good thing to talk about, but there just isn't time.
No, this episode nearly happened 2 weeks ago, and then unfortunately some of my day job got in the way of things. And
pesky day job.
today's episode is a completely different episode to what the previous episode would have been.
Yes.
Because so much has happened since then. We had like the strikes against the Houthis and all sorts of exciting things, which we will go into. So today we will be looking at the strikes against the Houthi Rebels, who've been attacking ships in the Red Sea. We're also going to look at the hunt for Hamas's spokesperson. We're going to be looking at Chinese spies recruiting Western politicians. We're also going to be looking at more information on the Chinese spy balloon, which was, we're coming up to the anniversary of that as well on the 4th of Feb. That's the anniversary of it being shot down. So I'm not sure how I'm going to mark that day, but there we go.
The spy balloon that floated right into our hearts.
Oh dear, I missed that weekend.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that weekend. I probably shouldn't have done, but I did. But there we go. And then what else? Oh yeah, then we've got this plot to kill Iranian journalists. So an Iranian operative was arrested in London in connection to a plot last year in which he was potentially targeting journalists. So he might have been doing sort of reconnaissance. So we'll go into that. Then after this jam-packed Espresso Martini, we will be moving on to our Patreon-only show called Extra Shot. On that, we'll be looking at reports of China rebuilding its nuclear weapons testing facility. We've also got the retirement of MI5's longest-serving member. We've got celebrities tricked into making propaganda videos for Russia. We've also got the concerns of a former CIA officer about Trump returning to the White House and what that might mean for the CIA. And then we're going to wrap up on the death of Gaston Glock, who created the legendary Glock pistol that's favoured by both sides of the law. So if you want to get access to Extra Shot, you would just need to go to patreon.com/secrets and spies and pick the subscription level that works best for you. And depending on which subscription level you pick, you either get a free coffee cup or a set of coasters. So, Matt, I think we will head off to Yemen, and I'm going to hand over to you to talk to us a little bit about these sort of Houthi rebels who've been attacking ships.
Anywhere else we could go on vacation?
Well, Havana's probably quite nice, but I think you're probably not allowed there still. Where else could we go? I don't know.
I don't know if I could just go to. I don't know if I can just. I know people who went on like a school trip a couple years ago.
Oh, nice.
I don't know. I would love to go to Havana if I could. I don't know if you need. You might need I'm totally filibustering this episode right now. I don't know if you need like a special reason to go. I know usually for a while that was sort of like, to go you needed like an actual reason, not just I want to go hang out in Havana. I'm not sure if that's the case still or not. I don't know.
My reasons would be probably the cigars, the rum, the Cuban beans and rice, because I really like that, and Cuban coffee. Are those valid reasons?
Those would be my reasons too. I don't think the feds list those as valid reasons.
Damn it. Oh, well, that's more a problem for you. I think I'm okay on my passport.
I know. Oh, well. All right. Anyway, Yemen, here we go. So yeah, we're drawing from an article in the Drives the War Zone by Howard Altman. So here's a couple key points from it, and then I will hand it over to you, Chris.
Mhm.
So the U.S. and U.K. conducted new airstrikes against Houthi targets in Yemen with support from Australia, Bahrain, Canada, and the Netherlands. The strikes targeted a Houthi underground storage site and locations associated with the Houthis' missile and air surveillance capabilities. The action was in response to Houthi attacks on international and commercial shipping, including anti-ship ballistic missile and unmanned aerial system attacks. The UK Ministry of Defense stated that RAF Typhoon fighters used Paveway 4 precision-guided bombs to strike military sites, enabling Houthi attacks on international shipping. The Pentagon named the operation against the Houthis Operation Poseidon Archer.
Good name.
Yeah, strong
Yeah, I
strong
like
name.
it.
Sounds like, yeah. The Biden administration is planning a sustained military campaign targeting the Houthis after earlier strikes failed to halt their attacks on maritime commerce. European Union member states have given initial backing to a naval mission to protect ships from Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. The U.S. has carried out preemptive strikes against Houthi missiles, and previous airstrikes hit over 60 targets in Houthi-controlled Yemen. Concerns are raised about the potential for an open-ended military operation derailing Yemen's fragile peace and involving the U.S. in another unpredictable Middle Eastern conflict. The recent strikes involved Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles, or TLAMs, manned aircraft from the U.S. Navy and UK Armed Forces, and were separate from Operation Prosperity Guardian, but not as cool a name,
No.
a defensive coalition in the Red Sea. The strikes were considered successful in destroying Houthi missiles, unmanned aerial systems, and weapons storage areas. The U.S. military officials did not specify how long the strikes would continue, but emphasized the aim to de-escalate and restore calm in the Red Sea. An unrelated interdiction mission on January 11th resulted in 2 Navy SEALs presumed dead after falling into the water during a nighttime boarding operation off Somalia.
Yeah.
So, Chris, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, well, first of all, that Navy SEAL story is very sad. I've been sort of following that for a few weeks. Have they actually recovered the bodies now? I've lost track, or are they still presumed missing and dead?
I haven't paid that much attention to the stat story itself. I believe it was a visit board search and seizure operation, so VBSS, that, SEALs do all the time. It's really like what they're made for. On a ship suspected of carrying arms off the coast of Somalia, and they were sort of like climbing up the hull. One SEAL fell in. This was a nighttime operation. One SEAL fell in. Another SEAL went in after him, and then they couldn't recover either one. Which is sort of like, if I've heard before in like drills in the Navy for like man overboard drills, that if you fall off a ship during the day, there's like a 60 to 70% chance that you'll survive. If you fall in at night, it goes down drastically. You could be like right there bobbing around in the water, and they very easily might not see you. I don't know. So to answer your question, I don't know if they recovered bodies or not, or if the search had just gone for X amount of time, and then, just biology math, it gets to a point that like you're not going to find them, and they're just presumed to be lost.
Terrible. I mean, it's the thing. So talk about death and stuff. So I mean, I think I was talking to you off air about this. I had an interesting conversation with a friend a few weeks ago who made the statement that, well, the Houthis haven't killed anybody, so why are we bombing them? And need I remind people that firing missiles at ships and even hijacking ships is dangerous, and if not stopped, it will lead to the death of crews working on those ships.
Well, those actions are attempts to kill people on those ships.
Exactly. The only reason they haven't succeeded is because of the US Navy and the Royal Navy, and them shooting down the missiles or drones that are attacking said ships. So, and I've noticed sort of again, there's been a lot of pro-Palestinian supporters, not all, but a few, who have sort of taken the sides of the Houthis against the US and UK strikes. And they believe that the Houthis are just attacking the ships out of solidarity with the Palestinians, and that the West's only interest is to avoid shipping delays to Amazon. That's become a new kind of, somebody said that on, I think it was Sky News the other day, and it's becoming this sort of clip that's been shown around. Certainly on my Instagram, I've seen it by a few people.
Such a
I know.
reductive and just kind of just playing to the lowest common denominator, just
Yeah.
dumb summation of the whole thing.
Tell me about it. Tell me from educated people who share this. And attacking ships is against international law, and I don't know why it always falls onto the US and UK to enforce international law, but it has. And and these strikes, to some extent, not perfect, but they are kind of what you would call a proportionate response to the actions, because they're trying to target the Houthis' capability to launch attacks, and they're trying to attack, sort of target their radar facilities that obviously help with the missiles targeting and so on. I know, I can imagine President Biden wants to avoid getting the US committed to a full-blown campaign that would have like boots on the ground, because we've all saw Iraq and Afghanistan, and I think most presidents sensibly would want to avoid that. However, the problem about these sort of campaigns is you don't always have full control over everything, and things can escalate. And all it takes, really, I think, because the Houthis have said they're going to retaliate, and certainly you've got a lot of people who've been sympathetic to the Palestinian cause who seem to be siding with them. So there is a concern that there might be a terrorism connection to said retaliation. And so could something terrible happen that might force the US to do more? Certainly Iran, who back the Houthis, have been quite busy. Not only are they, linked to the October 7th attacks, their proxies have been attacking US forces in Iraq and Syria. And obviously they're backing the Houthis, who are disrupting international shipping and basically causing a much bigger crisis, and, leading the Middle East further and further into a situation where there could be some sort of proper full-scale conflict again, all in an election year. So it's quite an interesting cocktail of things going on, and very disappointing to see some people's reaction to it on the left being, oh, it's just all about, dealing with Amazon delays. And it's a lot more complicated than that. And people will talk about inequality, some of the goods that are being shipped having to go round go via South Africa now by the Cape of Good Hope. And that's burning more fuel and extending the journey time of things, which will mean the prices of the items they're carrying will go up, which will further go into inequality. And on top of that, they're burning more fuel, which is more dangerous not dangerous, but more is worse for the environment. So there's an environmental issue here as well, if you want to throw it in there. Yeah, it's just a real interesting mix of things going on, really. So I think you and I, because we've been watching this Houthi thing go on over December and before, we've kind of been waiting for the US and UK to just do something, because it feels like that they've been just swatting these missiles and drones, and it's not really doing much. And this felt like the inevitable next step was going to be strikes against the Houthis. And I think many people have said it took them a very long time to do that. And I think I see Biden as a very careful and deliberate person. And I think he was again, like we were saying earlier, trying to avoid it escalating even further after the after the dreadful October the 7th attacks, and then obviously Israel's response to that. It could easily have blown up much bigger. So I kind of see why Biden was cautious. I mean, I've supported Biden's caution on Ukraine, and then feel like maybe now they should not be less cautious about Ukraine, but that's a whole different matter. So Matt, I'll hand it back to you as I ramble on there, but those are sort of my cocktail of thoughts there. Cocktail seems to be the word today. Maybe subconsciously I want one. I don't know.
Well,
I'm on coffee
the name
moment.
of the show.
Yeah,
It's what time is it over there?
It's 4:18 or 16:18
Okay.
in military parlance. Yeah.
The sun is past the yard arm. Let loose. For me, I got a ways to go still.
Yeah,
But
my
anyway.
cocktail at the moment is coffee and then a glass of water. So it's a very exciting cocktail right now. But there we go.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, so I think for me, it's if I'm trying to sort of judge in my own mind the success or rationality of this operation, I do think I understand Biden's cautiousness, of being deliberate and thoughtful and making sure you're not doing, I mean, like it was sort of, this was, I don't think this was meant as a compliment at the time, but you know, if you look at Biden as sort of the third term of Obama,
Yeah.
and in some respects, it kind of is. But I mean, when Obama first came into office, it was kind of like, again, this was, I don't think this was meant as sort of sort of a compliment, but his entire foreign policy was basically like, don't do stupid shit.
Which makes sense because
yes, I mean,
we don't want knee-jerk reactions. We saw where that got us. So do we need that again? You know,
coming after Bush and the Iraq War and, you know, the neoconservative, like we're going to bring freedom to the Middle East and all that kind of jazz. It does make sense. But at the same time, you sort of like, I mean, Obama was so like famously with like the red line in Syria and just wrapping yourself around the axle of, you know, thinking like, what am I going to do? What are we, you know, what's the most responsible thing? Should we, you talk endlessly to the point that, you know, when you do end up responding, it's either inadequate or it's too late. I mean, that was a serious and I think justifiable concern of the Obama administration's foreign policy, specifically in the second term. And I mean, to be honest, I see shades of that in Biden's response to what's, you know, to this new conflict in the Middle East. That's not to say that I think there's some merit to that for sure. But I think he has run the risk of doing sort of like too little, too late. Or, I mean, you see this again in the sort of tortured process of, should we send Abrams tanks to Ukraine? Should we send F-16s? Should we send ATACMS missiles? You know, and you just talk about this ad nauseum for months and months and months. And everyone knows eventually you're going to come to the decision that you're going to fucking send them anyway. That when you actually do, the Russians are so dug in on like four different levels that it's not as effective as it would have been if you had just done it in the first place. But at the same point, I see the calculus of, okay, we are taking a stick and poking it in the eye of a nuclear power in Ukraine. That's a concern. Maybe we should stop and think about that and be really sure about what we're doing here. Or on this, you know, you could very easily spark off a massive regional war in the Middle East, you know? So I see both sides here, right?
Yeah, definitely. And the Houthis are backed by Iran, so by attacking them, you are attacking an Iranian proxy, which is going to have effects. You know,
you could easily. There are Iranian advisors on the ground, like hand in glove, working with the Houthis, and it's very easy that I don't think I think we're trying to avoid killing them. And we do have a back channel with the Iranians as this goes on, which is the right and responsible thing to do, you know, to sort of have that back channel open with them as we're doing this stuff to avoid issues like that, you know. But okay, so going back to Yemen and sort of analyzing the effectiveness of this strategy, I think it's a matter of the objective, you know. So I see four potential objectives here in you know, in attacking the Houthis here. The first is, are we retaliating for specific attacks on shipping, right? Which would be okay, so like the Houthis fired a missile and struck this specific cargo ship. So we're going to then launch strikes to take out that firing position, you know, which it's just sort of tit for tat, and you're never sort of getting ahead of the issue. You're always just being kind of reactive and responding, and you're not in the driver's seat for the operation. You know, you're just responding to whatever the Houthis do, and you're not going to really get anywhere, especially if the Houthis are like, yeah, fuck you, we're going to keep doing it, right? Second one, you could preemptively strike to prevent specific attacks on shipping, which would require a considerable, persistent intelligence presence over the Arabian Sea, the Red Sea, the Gulf of Oman, over Yemen proper to be able to see signs of, this missile system being put into this sort of firing position, and we see that, okay, they're probably going to attack this ship or these selections of ships at this part of the Red Sea, and before they're able to fire that missile off, we're going to strike it on the pad. You know what I mean? That requires a considerable amount of intelligence ISR kind of investment in the region, right? So that's one strategy. The third is you destroy the Houthis' ability to conduct attacks on shipping at all, which would require a considerable amount of force, right? To just basically like sustained airstrikes, probably some limited special operations raids over the beach, right? To degrade their capabilities to be able to do this in the first place, right? So you take out the radars, the missiles, the depots, command and control assets, so that they're just unable to do this. And even then, you're going to have only a specific window of time that they're going to remain unable to do this because the Iranians are going to resupply them.
Yeah, unless you can get the resupply routes too. I mean, the third option at the moment does sound like the more effective one.
It does.
but at the same time, it does require a lot of investment of time and effort.
The fourth is you remove the Houthis from power, which requires an open-ended war, so to speak. And there's no appetite for that whatsoever. No. It would definitely incur casualties on our side, which there is no appetite for whatsoever. And that's the most risky in terms of an escalatory, like you could potentially spark off a huge regional war in the Middle East. So I think to what you said earlier, I think somewhere on option 3 is the sweet spot.
Yeah.
But I think bottom line is the worst course of action would be to do nothing at all.
Yeah, no, it would be. And then the other flip side to that being regime change, which I think history and recent history has shown us when an outside force does regime change,
it doesn't work.
It doesn't work unless you go full blown into it and have a preset kind of person to be the figurehead of it, and then they'll have to be ruthless in dealing with opposition. But again, that just leads to another terrible situation. It's never a good idea.
As for the issue of escalation, I mean, I think the chance for something to go wrong, whether that's in Yemen, Iraq, Lebanon, or all three, I think that'll be present as long as the situation in Gaza remains unresolved. I mean, honestly, I think at the end of the day, the best way to shut down these attacks in the Red Sea is to get a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, right? And that the Houthis' stated rationale for doing these attacks then also stop, right? And then if they keep it up, I mean, at least you have a much better argument that, they're full of shit and,
Well, yeah, definitely.
Right, so there's that. But I think generally the issue of escalation and trying to avoid escalation has been managed by the administration fairly well. Something could still go wrong easily, for sure. I'm not discounting that. But I mean, to be honest, the only time since October 7th that I've been seriously concerned, and I've said this to you on here and offline, the only time since October 7th that I've been seriously concerned about a large regional conflagration really getting out of control was the night that Islamic Jihad missile fell back on that hospital in Gaza, and you had all those protests all across the Middle East. That was the only night that I was seriously concerned that something bad was going on. I mean, otherwise...
It was a bit on par with... Do you remember the protests against the film about Muslims that led to the Benghazi situation?
Yes.
It was a bit on par with that, wasn't it?
Yeah, it did. It felt a lot like that. I'm not saying you got to hand it to the Iranians or Hezbollah. You absolutely don't have to hand it to them. But if they wanted a massive regional war by now, we would have had one.
Yeah.
There have been plenty of opportunities to just go buck wild, and they haven't taken it. Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah specifically, has sort of repeatedly said, we're not going all out for this, I think, honestly, Netanyahu and his sort of closest allies are fucking arsonists, and the sooner Israel has elections and puts a new government in office that's not him,
well, yeah,
that'll ratchet down things a lot. The potential for,
mm.
Netanyahu to wake up with low blood sugar one morning and say, I'm going to nuke Beirut,
Well, this is it. Not only did he, did the worst terrorist attack in Israel's history happen on his watch, then he's now gone as far as saying he has zero intention to help create a Palestinian state, which is disrupting any potential peace plan.
Sure.
So it's like Netanyahu's, and also the Israeli reaction, which has been huge. And I would cautiously, I mean, is an overreaction. I think it's a disproportionately been major overreaction. They've kind of fallen into what Tom Parker called the terrorist trap. They've lost all moral authority, but a lot of people are very anti-Israel now, much more than they were before October the 7th. I mean,
oh yeah.
So I think the Israeli reaction just has put fuel on that fire, on that issue. I don't blame Israel for wanting to do something, but I think torching all of Gaza was not the way to do it. But at the same time, I'm not a military strategist who could say, well, what they should have done was this, because I have no idea how you deal with the situation. And obviously, as we still speak, there are still hostages in Hamas's captivity. And I don't think bombing the bejesus out of Gaza necessarily guarantees those hostages are going to come back. So, yeah, it's a very, very difficult situation at the moment. And I think,
I think as far as Yemen is concerned, though, an open-ended US-UK involvement in Yemen is not wise. I think we need to decide what our objective is, let it be realistic, get in, get it done, get out.
Yeah. Well, this is it. And if they don't do something, I think it will escalate. Yemen is famously the site of the USS Cole attack, which was an interesting piece of terrorist history, because I don't know if you know this, but I was reading a really interesting book called The Black Banners by Ali Soufan, and apparently the lack of reaction by the Americans to the USS Cole attack led to 9/11. And the reason it led to 9/11 is because Al-Qaeda had financial backers, and they needed to appear serious to warrant people backing them. And after the USS Cole attack being a kind of a damp squib on the reaction front, they needed something else to get the US to respond the way they wanted to. And that's what led to 9/11. So I guess if we keep ignoring things, then sometimes they come back to haunt us in terrible ways. And so I think it would be very irresponsible of the US to completely ignore the Yemen situation. I know some people would like them to, but I think that would be really a bad idea. So yeah, so there we go.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one.
Anything else you wanted to add on the Houthis here?
No, I think that pretty much covers the Houthis. For now, I'm sure there'll be more to say about them in the future, quite possibly.
Yeah, we'll probably definitely come back to this next time.
Yeah.
Take a little bit more of a look at it, maybe.
Definitely. So now we've got the hunt for the Hamas spokesperson. Do you want to have a chat about that?
Yeah, so this next article we're drawing from is called The Determined Hunt for Hamas's Most Mysterious Kingpin by Shannon Vavra. I believe that's how you say her last name, Shannon Vavra, at The Daily Beast. So here's a couple key points from the article. Israel claims to have identified the anonymous spokesperson for Hamas, known as Abu Ubaidah. The IDF revealed the alleged identity as Hudayfa Khalut, accusing him of hiding behind a red keffiyeh and engaging in violent activities. Israel's announcement is part of a broader strategy to conduct targeted killings abroad, aiming to weaken Hamas psychologically. Naming and shaming Abu Ubaidah is seen as a way to disrupt Hamas, achieve a PR victory, and exert psychological impact on the group. The effort is likely intended to send a message to Hamas that Israel can track down its fighters and leadership anywhere. The unmasking may also serve to bolster domestic support for Israel's fight against Hamas and tarnish the group's reputation. Speculation suggests that Abu Ubaidah may be a symbolic brand rather than a single individual with a team creating propaganda for Hamas. Even if Abu Ubaidah is captured or killed, Hamas could potentially replace him with another militant challenging Israel's claims. Abu Ubaidah was rumored to be injured in an Israeli attack, but released a statement indicating his survival after a temporary truce. The truce ended with both Israel and Hamas accusing each other of breaking the ceasefire. Chris, what do you think about Abu Ubaidah?
Yeah, I can understand why the Israelis want to target him, because they got him. It would have this sort of huge psychological impact on Hamas and its leaders and its followers. I'm not entirely clear on the legality of killing spokespeople for regimes and terrorist organizations, but I assume that they're classed as a kind of collaborator or combatant, and they can be seen as a legitimate military target. But anybody who's a legal expert, feel free to drop me an email to tell me otherwise. Then I'm also intrigued by this idea that Abu Ubaidah might not be one person, but could be many people. And it could lead to this sort of Spartacus type situation in which suddenly many people claim to be Abu Ubaidah, which would then have the reverse psychological impact, as Abu Ubaidah would be seen as somebody who'd never be killed, never be silenced. In a way, a bit like ISIS, the brand lives on and probably will live on forever as the formal group dies off. But all someone has to do is say that they are ISIS and do something terrible, which has happened with many lone wolf actors. So ISIS kind of lives on even if the group itself, certainly in Iraq, were decimated. And then on a previous episode, we spoke about Mossad and other Israeli units who've expressed an intention to hunt down and kill Hamas members connected to October the 7th. I think in real life that's going to be hard to achieve, especially if Hamas members move to the US or Europe, where assassination by an allied or hostile intelligence services is illegal. And would have to be conducted under the noses of some of the world's top domestic intelligence services, namely FBI, MI5, etc. But, once the identity of a member of Hamas is known, then it could become this sort of waiting game for that target who may be hiding in Europe or America to hop on a plane to a location that fits into sort of Mossad's favor. Then things could change. So there's a lot of interesting sort of things there, really. But I think this idea of we're going to be able to kill them all, I just don't think is realistic.
No, I think it's interesting to see this, like the naming and shaming of this guy, who we think this guy is, but who they think this guy is. It's interesting to see that as part of a broader effort to target Hamas's leadership, including their leadership outside of Gaza. Which, I mean, like I said, I think before the ground invasion even began, that to me anyway, like the targeted killings of specific key individuals coupled with special operations raids and limited airstrikes should have been the primary strategy here from the beginning, rather than just burning down all of Gaza.
Yeah.
But I think what's most interesting to me is that, as you said, that Abu Ubaidah might be more of like a title, or like they call it like a kunya or a nom de guerre that sort of rotates from spokesman to spokesperson. Or what's to say that, like, if they did actually kill the guy who was, really Abu Ubaidah, that there's not some other dude with a red keffiyeh scarf that comes out and says, I'm Abu Ubaidah and you didn't get me at all. That's an interesting concept, to have it sort of like a rotating sort of, it's almost like it feels sort of like an internet personality kind of thing, like a anonymous or something, that I never really considered that before, but it's a very interesting, again, I don't think the Israelis seem to believe it's just one specific guy.
Yeah.
But it's just an interesting thought that it's a team of people, or just, whoever is Hamas's spokesperson at the time, this is what they call themselves. It's very, I don't know, mouth of Sauron-y.
Well, yeah, so the Abu Ubaidah story is an interesting one. We'll have to keep an eye on, see what happens with that. And I guess let's hope, for a lot of people's sake, that lots of people don't start getting killed because the Israelis think that they're Abu Ubaidah and it turns out to be multiple people. So we will keep an eye on that one.
Let me say unequivocally right now, I am not Abu Ubaidah.
Neither am I. It's a bit like, do you remember Zodiac? I'm not Paul Avery.
Yeah.
There's going to be some badges soon coming out saying I'm not Paul Avery. I'm not Abu Ubaidah. Oh, dearie me. But there we go. Well, let's take a quick break and then we'll be right back. So let's look at some Chinese spies who have allegedly been recruiting European politicians in an operation to divide the West. So this is from the Financial Times, this article. and the link will be in the show notes. So apparently Chinese spies have allegedly been running a far-right Belgian politician named Frank Kreilman as an intelligent asset for more than 3 years. This case has shown how Beijing has conducted influence operations in an effort to shape political discussions in Europe on topics like Hong Kong's democracy crackdown and the Uyghur persecution in Xinjiang. Daniel Wu, an intelligence officer for the Ministry of State Security, asked Kreilman to sway European politicians into publicly stating that the US and UK undermined European energy security. Whilst most big countries do engage in spying, the MSS, Ministry of State Security operation in Europe, highlights one of the defining features of Chinese espionage, which is widespread influence operations aimed at shaping political debate that span from Ottawa, London, and Canberra. Washington has repeatedly warned of covert efforts by Beijing to interfere with elections. Wu's operation apparently spanned several countries, including Poland, Romania, and focused on manipulating academics, policymakers, business leaders, and politicians. So Kreilman, who was a former Belgian senator, was recruited remotely, and despite the concerns over his recruitment, his attempts to actually fulfill Chinese requests, such as opposing a resolution against the Uyghur genocide and arranging a pro-China article, has actually had limited success. So, yeah, this is an interesting one. Again, obviously, this is still an ongoing case, so we don't know 100% for sure if Frank Kreilman actually was a Chinese asset. I think they're still determining that. But it certainly is a similar case to other ones that we've talked about. So, Matt, I'll come to you, and then I'll add some extra thoughts there. Any thoughts for you on this one?
What's up with a far-right politician trying to benefit the Chinese? I just don't, from a sort of
Yeah.
philosophical, political standpoint, I don't get. I mean, like, okay, like mice. I don't know. This article doesn't talk about any sort of like financial benefit, right?
Oh, well, no, not yet. No.
Where on that sort of, money ideology, coercion, ego, where would he fall? It seems to me, I don't know this guy,
No.
but like a far right politician ideologically working with the Chinese government would be, unless you're just an idiot, would just not seem palatable. I don't know.
No. Yeah, because with the Russians, because as we've said before, the Russians sort of have linked themselves quite well to far-right ideology,
Right.
represent themselves as the savior of the white Christian world.
They are far right themselves.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a logical kind of ideological step. So maybe that takes ideology off the table, and so that leaves money, coercion, and ego. Certainly in the UK, there was a scandal. Let's get my notes back. There was a scandal just only a few years back involving a lady named Christine Lee, who MI5 issued an alert about because she had established links to the Communist Party, and she'd be making donations to certain MPs, and it was seen as a sign of foreign interference. So maybe this guy is a bit, typically all of these far-right politicians are actually quite low-level politicians in the real world. And I don't know much about Belgian politics, and forgive me for not double checking. I just ran out of time. But he might be quite a low level politician, and somebody somewhere might have stroked his ego a little bit. And he suddenly felt like he was becoming a bigger player than he actually was. And that also might explain why he hasn't been particularly successful. Because it's the other interesting thing as well, when a foreign agent looks at politicians in the West, unless they have a full understanding of where that politician sits in the grand scheme of things, they can end up wasting a lot of resources on someone who's useless.
Like you're,
because I think I read in Oleg Gordievsky's book, he talks a bit about like how the KGB would avoid certain far left politicians because they saw them as a waste of resources.
How would you feel being one of those far left politicians? Like you want to be as useful an idiot as you possibly can be, but then you see that they're like, no, you're not. You don't like that. Must be so soul crushing.
I think so. Yeah. And funny enough, quite a few, because Gordievsky made claims about Michael Foot, who was a Labour leader. There's quite a few people on the far left who really hate Oleg Gordievsky, and I do wonder if there's an element of that they feel a bit disappointed. I don't know by what's come
Maybe.
out. I don't know. It's an interesting one. There's a
Maybe.
real deep hatred, but there we go.
I mean,
Mm.
there's a quote in here that Kreilman's handler, Wu, wrote to him in a text message. He said, "Our purpose is to divide the U.S.-European relationship," which to me is the whole ballgame
Yeah.
right there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's it. That's why they're up to these shenanigans. Like we've talked about previously, like Chinese operations inside the UK. Essentially, it's to, yes, gain influence and sympathy with people who the Chinese believe will be in positions of influence inside UK and European politics, but also to drive a wedge between the US and Europe,
Yeah.
which, if you think back to, I mean, during the Trump administration, and then in the, heartburn of anticipating perhaps a second Trump administration, you've seen a lot of comments from like Emmanuel Macron in France saying essentially that, Europe should have, rather than antagonizing the Chinese or standing staunchly against them as the U.S. would, and as the U.S. would no doubt want Europe to do, Europe should have a healthy, cooperative economic relationship with the Chinese. And ultimately, that boils down to, we don't know or believe if the U.S. can be a credible partner going ahead in the future. So we have to hedge our bets somewhere, which I think goes to show the stupidity on our side fuels these kinds of efforts.
Yeah.
If the U.S. remains a credible, stable partner committed to small d democratic norms and institutions in the West, it makes it a whole lot harder for Chinese intelligence agents to draw that wedge between the U.S. and Europe. It hurts the entire Western alliance to act and think this way.
Well, this is it. And from a warfare point of view, that's perfect, because it means if your enemy is divided, you don't really have to fight them anymore. Which again is behind active measures with Russia as well. Russia have been doing this for the last 20 years. Yeah, it's been famously said that Russia is at war with the West, but the West is not at war with Russia. And that's the problem at the moment. We're waking up to this idea that actually Russia considers itself at war with the West at the moment. And maybe China feels that way too. Maybe they feel they're at war with the West also, because it certainly is starting to feel that way. And these sort of actions are concerning.
Well, the Chinese system, under Xi especially, is trying to pitch an alternative way of organizing and managing human society that is in complete opposition to what the West has offered since the Enlightenment. You could even, you could say since World War II, but you could even draw it back to the Enlightenment. Freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, liberal economic rules. The Chinese system is opposed to all of that. And it pitches that ours is restrictive. Yes, you don't have all those freedoms, but it's also not chaos, as small d democracy offers. That's what they're pitching. And so, their efforts are in total opposition to the Western way of life.
Indeed. And certainly, they don't look like they're being shy about their aims, do they?
No.
Thanks for that, Matt. So, I mean, like last year we spoke about the case of Chris Cash, who was a researcher working in Britain's Parliament, and he was arrested on suspicion of spying. And Cash was the director of an influential China policy group that had links to parliamentarians, civil servants, and other think tank members on China issues. And, Cash has denied being a spy for the Chinese government, and it's still not clear at this time whether he's innocent or guilty. But certainly there's a lot of strong feelings that he was the sort of perfect, sort of, should we say, target for the Chinese intelligence services, and because of his connections to people. Then I mentioned earlier we had Christina Lee, who MI5 issued an alert about because she had established links to the Communist Party and she was paying money to MPs in the UK. Last year as well, Channel 4, the broadcaster, have a documentary strand called Dispatches, which is an investigative journalism program. And in that show, they make claims that Chinese agents with diplomatic and unofficial cover have actually been influential across universities across the country. And they alleged that the University of Nottingham closed its School of Contemporary Chinese Studies in 2016 in response to pressure from Beijing, because its head, Professor Steve Sang, openly criticized the Chinese Communist Party. So it is believed that Beijing managed to get the school closed because of that criticism. And then there's also claims that at Imperial College in London, a leading computer scientist collaborated with researchers at a Chinese university to publish papers on the use of artificial intelligence weaponry that could be used to the benefit of the Chinese military. And also, Meta last year issued a report that's saying that China was behind the largest ever digital influence operation, with groups linked to the Communist Party and Chinese law enforcement peppering more than 50 social media platforms with pro-Beijing messages. And apparently on Facebook, clandestine users with ties to the Chinese government racked up more than 550,000 followers by spouting lies about the US's alleged role in creating COVID-19 and also criticizing Washington's support of Taiwan. Now, in the grand scheme of things, 550,000 followers isn't that much. So how effective these things are is open to debate, but they're certainly trying. They're certainly trying. And there's plenty of evidence to, to basically say that people need to be a bit cautious about all this.
Yeah.
Keeping our China theme, let's move on to the spy balloon, which is coming up to the year's anniversary of it being shot down.
Almost a year, yeah.
Oh, well, get a nice drink and toast
Yeah.
the demise of the spy balloon.
Think back to the memories, yeah.
But Matt, is there any new information that's sort of come out that you've seen?
Yeah, so there's an article in NBC News by Courtney Cube and Carol Lee. It's called U.S. Intelligence Officials Determined the Chinese Spy Balloon Used a U.S. Internet Provider to Communicate. So here's some of the details. U.S. intelligence officials have determined that the Chinese spy balloon that flew across the U.S. last February used a commercially available U.S. network for communication. The balloon connected to a U.S.-based company to send and receive communications from China, primarily related to navigation, enabling it to send burst transmissions of high-bandwidth data. The Biden administration sought a secret court order from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, that's FISA, to collect intelligence on the balloon while it was over the U.S. The court's ruling has not been disclosed, which, I mean, they probably, I'm sure, got the permission to do so. I don't see why they would. The U.S. company, identified by officials, denied the balloon's use of its network based on its own investigation and discussions with U.S. officials. The National Security Council declined to comment, and the Chinese embassy spokesperson stated that the balloon used for meteorological research accidentally drifted into U.S. airspace. Chinese intelligence officials had previously used commercially available service providers in other countries for covert communication. The U.S. effort to monitor the balloon's communications may explain claims of obtaining more intelligence from the device than it collected while flying over the U.S.
Well, yeah. That's what I've always suspected. I think the reason that balloon was allowed to stay in the air for so long is because the U.S. probably wants to crack some encryption, and once they did, they got this lovely gateway into the Chinese intelligence systems and got a nice peek in there. Yeah, I'm not sure who got the better end of that deal in the end, but there was certainly, again, a lot of criticism of the Biden administration. I think here's a wider theme. I think the problem is today there's a big disconnect in the public consciousness about like how the military work and think. And it does lead to some very strange talking points on the internet. So to my mind, when I saw that balloon was around, I figured that obviously there's something interesting there and there's a reason why it's kept up, because the American Air Force could have shot that thing down on day one, and it would be a very good reason why they didn't. And it is just amazing, all the wild, nonsensical speculation, which leads to them people criticizing President Biden for being weak on national security or whatever. And I think largely it's just because a lot of people just don't know how things actually work. And it's very frustrating to see, I think. And it just leads to wild, nonsensical speculation on Twitter.
Yes. So the balloon passed over the northern plains region of the U.S., so like North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, well within sight of our three ICBM fields. So that's F.E. Warren, Malmstrom, and Minot Air Force bases, right? And in this article, General Van Herk, who's the commander of NORAD, says they worked with U.S. Strategic Command to reduce the release of emergency action messages so the balloon couldn't intercept them. So emergency action messages are issued from the National Military Command Center in the Pentagon and direct the use of nuclear capable forces. So like, yeah, it's like the highest priority traffic inside the U.S. Armed Forces, right? That basically, directs any U.S. Nuclear capable force, whether that's a ballistic missile submarine or one of these missile squadrons that maintain, like the silos, or strategic bombers, B-2s, B-52s, B-1s. B-1s carry nuclear armed.
I think they can. Whether they do or
they
not is
can.
another
I don't know if
matter.
they're
But yeah,
part of strategic command. I'm not sure about
Yeah.
that. But B-2s and B-52s, yes, absolutely. Right. So they were aware of this and took measures to prevent the Chinese from collecting that information, which to me, I mean, I think I even said this at the time, like looking at the flight plan, that's entirely it went like directly over that area. And you look at that in concert with China's own sort of renewed focus on developing its own nuclear force posture. It makes sense to me that they would have a lot of interest in how our own nuclear command and control system operates, right? I want to go back to sort of the point of the article that NBC doesn't say who the U.S. service provider was. They say they don't want to like blow the source by saying it. I was curious if you had any thought as to who it might have been.
No, I don't know.
So the balloon was operating at like 60,000 feet, right? Which is like twice the height of a commercial airliner, right? Flying across the country. So that's really, really high up.
Yeah, even
right?
higher than a drone, actually, because the drones usually operate about 53,000 feet, I believe.
Right. So you think, okay, at that height, what could operate? There's no cell signal up there, so it has to be satellite, right?
Oh.
Who has the infrastructure to operate and markets to, commercial aircraft, private jets and stuff?
Yep. The penny has
to
dropped.
Put their yes, that would be commercially available off-the-shelf equipment that could be used within North America to communicate with a reliable satellite-based system. And again, the article does not say, but I don't know who else it would be if not Starlink.
Yeah. Well, answers on a postcard to X. X support, because they're not being very helpful at the moment. But no, definitely. I think you might be right there.
It has to be Starlink. I don't know who else it would be.
Yeah, unless they're piggybacking off, because there are obviously you got all these sort of commercial satellites that do photography and things. You can like piggyback. It's a bit like you can use a nanny cam to do things. You can use it as a sort of to hack stuff. I have no idea how you do that, but you can use it as, I guess, a node to send a signal somewhere else. So if it weren't Starlink, there is a possibility it could be targeting other commercial satellites that are not as well connected or spread out as Starlink. But yeah, Starlink makes a lot of sense. But yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, I'm thinking like there's like like Iridium. Iridium. Inmarsat is mostly geared toward maritime shipping, maritime operations. Thuraya is another one that comes to mind, but their network is, I think, mostly geared at like the Middle East and Asia. Others off the top of my head, I'm not sure. I mean, to me, Starlink is just they have the scale, they have the constellation in place to do it. The reliability, the sort of the article talks about also how these balloons like to operate with off the shelf available US equipment, US made equipment, which makes sense because you think if the likelihood that this is going to get shot down or intercepted is quite high, right? So if the Chinese are going to lose the asset, why would you put your own internally produced really good stuff
Mm.
aboard?
Mm.
You know, it makes sense to just have U.S. based commercially available stuff that if you lose it, okay, you're not losing like a sophisticated national asset, right? What's a widely available U.S. based commercial off the shelf equipment that you could use? Starlink.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So, well, time
Yeah.
time will tell, which is a common phrase in this podcast these days. Time will tell.
Yeah.
We will see where that goes.
Yep.
But there we go. So, should we move on to our final story of Espresso Martini today?
Yes.
So, a man has been found guilty of spying on a London-based TV channel, which is called Iran International, and he was allegedly helping terror plotters. So, Magomed Hussein Dovatev was convicted of attempting to carry out hostile reconnaissance at the former site of the Persian language media company Iran International in London. Dovatev was arrested after security guards at the Chiswick Business Park, where Iran International was based at the time, grew concerned about his activities. He had been taking a keen interest in the building and was spotted conducting surveillance. Detectives found Dovatev flew from Vienna to Gatwick Airport on the morning of the 11th February 2023, and from there he went straight to the Chiswick Business Park in a minicab. The media company had received serious threats from Iran against its staff due to its reporting on political and social issues in Iran, and Dovatev's phone, which was recovered and analysed by detectives, revealed that he had researched the building before arriving in the UK. So he was convicted of attempting to collect information likely to be useful under the Section 58 of the Terrorism Act at a trial in the Old Bailey. So he was convicted for that. And despite his arrest, Dovatev has never disclosed who he was working for, but there is sufficient evidence to indicate his involvement in terrorist-related activity. And then details of the plot, which have been uncovered by the British news outlet ITV News, has said that there were plans to kill the journalists Simmar Sabet and Fardad Farhazad, who are both employees at the Iran International Channel. So, quite a worrying sort of development there. And thankfully, the security guard did their job and Counterterrorism Command could do theirs. So, Matt, I don't know if you had any sort of thoughts on this one.
And this guy told the police that he was filming the Chiswick Business Park because he admired the architecture, right? He thought the architecture was really stunning.
I wonder where he got that line from.
Is a Salisbury Cathedral on the same architectural tour of the UK? Do you guys are there posters of the Chiswick Business Park at Heathrow when you come in? Like Salisbury Cathedral, Chiswick Business Park, Big Ben, the Tower Bridge. Like you got to see them all.
Funnily enough, it is in a Bollywood movie that I can't remember the name of. And it is quite a cool-looking, metallic-y kind of building. But apart from that, I don't think he can really justify spending the amount of time he spent there, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can he name that Bollywood movie? That's the question.
I maybe. I don't know. He's operationally casing the joint, you know. It does not seem to be that he was, you know, like the button pusher, so to speak. You know, he was not going to be the one to have gone and do something. He's basically just a cutout that was sent, you know, to record footage of the building, you know, placement of security cameras, guard desks, that kind of thing, you know, windows, the setback from the street, I don't know, stuff like that, right? That then it would have been used to packaged up with a bunch of other material that then, you know, the actual people who would have been the button pushers there would have acted on.
Interesting job. Wonder what the employment prospects of that are, you know, and how many places you go per year and stuff like that, and whether you ever know what it was all for.
Yeah, I wonder how much it pays. Like if the pay is decent or something. You know,
if there's health insurance and all that. There's certainly not any legal support by the looks of things. But
do we know for sure that this was part of a? I read the article late last night, and some of the details escape me, unfortunately. Do we know for sure if this was part of a confirmed operational plan to target the building or people who were there, or are they just sort of scoping it out?
Yeah, I think from what I've read, There's enough to convict them because of his history, apparently, and past terrorism. Whether I don't think they've got enough evidence to say he was there to kill particular people.
Right.
That was an ITV News thing that came up later on.
Yeah.
But from what I've read of the article and the Metropolitan Police information on it, I've not seen anything which says he had like profiles of people. Which again, if he's the reconnaissance person, then that makes some sense, doesn't it?
It may have just been I mean, they were right to, arrest the guy and convict him. I mean, he was for sure like doing operational surveillance of the building. But rather than it being part of an imminent attempt to target employees or something of the studio, it may have been more of just them, Iranian intelligence, putting like case files together on dissident groups and stuff operating
Possibly.
in the UK that they could then pull out of the drawer and say okay, we're gonna do that now. That makes sense.
Well, that particular channel's been under permanent armed police protection since this plot, and I think I suspect maybe MI5 and Counterterrorism Command might have some extra information that's sort of out of the public domain that kind of connects it to something more solid. Because when you put it that way, it doesn't sound very solid, does it? But I'm not sure. That's an interesting one. That yeah. Well,
cool story.
I guess we'll have to find out more. But yeah, he's now behind bars. But yeah, it's not the first time Iranian journalists have been targeted or harassed. There was a lady called Anita Shams for BBC Persia who, back in 2019, told the Human Rights Council how she and her female colleagues face constant harassment by the Iranian government. And there was an incident that involved a fake pornographic image being sent to the son of a journalist. So apparently sexual indecency is the main technique used to discredit female Iranian journalists in the West. And then Freedom House issued a report in December saying that at least 26 governments had targeted reporters abroad in the last decade in a process known as transnational repression. And the Iranian government is among one of the worst perpetrators of transnational repression, the report found. And Freedom House, if you don't know, they were founded in 1941 to rally policymakers in the fight against, to rally policymakers and a broadly isolationist American public around the fight against Nazi Germany. And they've been around ever since then. So Freedom House is a very interesting organization who kind of are all about sort of freedom and democracy and devoted to support the defense of democracy around the world. So they do reports quite often on these sort of topics. So so definitely there has been an ongoing threat to Iranian journalists, and physical threats. It seems to be an escalation. I'm not aware in the UK of an Iranian journalist being killed by the Iranian government, but there might have been a historical case I just don't know of. I know of a Libyan student who was allegedly murdered by Colonel Gaddafi's regime on British soil. In the 80s, but other than that, I'm trying to think now. But yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not an authority on that, but maybe again somebody can let us know if there is a case that stands out. But I didn't see one. I was having a look through today. So I think that's it for Espresso Martini. So Matt, thank you for joining me on this. Let us move over to Extra Shot. Again, listeners, if you wish to join us on Extra Shot, please just go to patreon.com/secrets and spies, and you can subscribe there, select the level that works for you. You'll get a free cup or coasters, and you'll get access to Extra Shot, plus our previous Extra Shots too, because we're getting a bit of a collection building now. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you on Patreon.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening. This is Secrets and Spies.